1977 draft. The 1977 NBA draft turned into a complete circus, held in Madison Square Garden. This thing dragged through 8 rounds with 170 total picks. By then, most teams were already tired of pretending like round 7 pick number 147 was going to change their season. So what did they do? They rebelled. Kansas City Kings? They went full Olympic mode and drafted Bruce Jenner, who'd never touched a pro basketball court. Boston Celtics? They apparently chose their water boy in one of the late rounds. That's how deep the nonsense ran. But then the Lakers went full cartoon. They tried to draft Scooby-Doo. That was real. And the league wasn't amused. They rejected it. The Lakers weren't done. Next came a wooden chair. They claimed it belonged to Jerry West's mom. Again, denied. But the point was made loud and clear. The draft had become a joke, and the teams used that stage to mock it. It wasn't just about the picks. It was about calling out the absurdity of wasting time going so deep into a pool of talent that just wasn't there. The league didn't change a thing that year, though. It actually took 12 more years for them to finally cut it down. But this draft, this one screamed for change, with a cartoon dog and a wooden chair leading the charge. Wilt races and Olympian. Wilt Chamberlain's track numbers are so wild, they sound like playground myth. But the man really was built like a superhero and still ran like a sprinter. In high school, he clocked 49 seconds in the 440-yard dash. He also ran the 880 yards in 1 minute and 58.3 seconds. And then there's the high jump, 6 feet 6 inches while being 7 feet tall. Who even does that? By the time he got to Kansas, he just kept stacking up the stats. 10.9 seconds in the 100-yard dash, over 50 feet in the triple jump, and 56 feet in the shot put. Let that sink in. This wasn't some clunky big man trotting around a track. He was winning Big 8 high jump titles for 3 years. And somehow, the stories get even crazier. There are people who say Wilt beat Jim Brown. Yes, that Jim Brown, twice in 100-yard sprints. No cameras, no timers, just bragging rights. And those bragging rights never left. Now, Mac Robinson was no slouch. He brought home a silver medal from Berlin in the 200 meters. That time put him right near 10.9 seconds in the 100 meters. So, the idea of Wilt going toe-to-toe with an Olympian doesn't sound that far-fetched when you look at those numbers. Even if there's no official record of a face-off, just look at Wilt's times. 10.9 seconds, while weighing almost 300 pounds and standing over 7 feet. That's not just fast, that's freak-level athletic. The guy basically rewrote the limits of what a body could do. Barry Bremen's Lakers prank. Back in 1974, the Lakers were stumbling around after a letdown of a season, desperate for something new. Enter Barry Bremen, the master of mischief, who decided to create a fake basketball prodigy out of thin air. He called him Scooter McCrae, a 7-foot unicorn, supposedly playing at the University of South Texas State, which, spoiler alert, did not exist. Bremen didn't just toss out a name. He built an entire legend. He forged stats, wrote glowing scouting reports, even claimed Scooter had Bill Walton's brain in Artis Gilmore's body. And to top it off, he had a coach's letter, swearing by this guy's future all-star potential. He mailed it out like it was real, and one team actually fell for it. Yep, the Lakers. They didn't just take a glance and move on. They seriously considered drafting him. He made it onto their internal draft board. They were getting ready to bring this imaginary giant to Los Angeles for a private workout. And Bremen, he kept delaying, saying Scooter had to finish classes or was nursing an ankle injury. Eventually, one exec got suspicious and decided to check out the school. That's when it all unraveled. There was no school, no coach, no player, just a fictional basketball hero created by a guy who sold insurance for a living. The Lakers were not amused, but one scout reportedly said they actually debated drafting him anyway because the paperwork was just that good. Only Barry Bremen could almost convince a professional basketball team to burn a pick on a ghost. And honestly, that's just legendary level trolling. By the way, if you guys want to subscribe, I'm going to be posting every day. Thanks. Anyway, Colin Sexton's 3-on-5 takeover. This one is college basketball, but it's still crazy. Plus, it's a great NBA player, Colin Sexton. Alabama's bench had already disappeared after the brawl got everyone tossed with 13 minutes left in the second half. Then Dazon Ingram fouled out with 11 minutes to go. And just like that, John Petty rolled his ankle, limped off, and suddenly Alabama was playing with 3 players against 5 in a real actual college basketball game. The scoreboard wasn't pretty. Minnesota had a 15-point lead, and Alabama was down to Colin Sexton, Galen Smith, and Riley Norris. But instead of folding, Sexton went into full maniac mode. He didn't just run the offense, he was the offense. The lead shrank. With just over a minute left, Alabama had clawed it back to 83-80. 3 guys nearly flipping the game entirely. It was unreal. Sexton dropped 40 points. He went 12 for 22 from the field and 12 for 16 at the line. That wasn't just a hot streak. It was a clinic. Every bucket he hit felt like a punchback at the scoreboard. Minnesota looked confused, like they were seeing a glitch in real life. Even Richard Pitino, Minnesota's coach, was stunned, said Sexton could be a team all by himself. And honestly, that night, he was. ESPN called it one of the most bizarre things they'd ever seen. Reddit melted down over the insanity. Final score? Minnesota barely held on, 89-84. But nobody remembers who won. They remember that for 10 full minutes, Colin Sexton played 3-on-5 basketball and almost pulled off one of the craziest upsets in college history. That was no fluke. That was a full-on statement. The Brooks trade debacle. This one's a front office comedy sketch disguised as an NBA trade. Back in December of 2018, the Suns, Wizards, and Grizzlies cooked up a 3-team deal. The Wizards were ready to grab Trevor Ariza. The Suns would get Austin Rivers, Wayne Selden, and a guy named Brooks. And Memphis would walk away with Kelly Oubre Jr. That's where it broke. Turns out no one clarified which Brooks was being shipped. The Suns thought they were getting Dylan Brooks, the young starter with real upside. Memphis, they were offloading Marshawn Brooks, a veteran with less shine. This wasn't some last-minute hiccup. This was a full-on identity crisis. Nobody double-checked. Nobody clarified. So Memphis pulls both Dylan and Marshawn into the locker room and tells them they've been traded. Moments later, just kidding. Turns out no one agrees on which Brooks is in the deal. The confusion nuked the whole thing. The trade was dead, just evaporated because someone didn't say the first name out loud. Chris Waller, the Grizzlies GM, was stunned, called it unfathomable. He had to backtrack in the middle of a transaction. Imagine telling two guys they're out of town, then 20 minutes later going, actually, never mind. Eventually, the Suns and Wizards just cut Memphis out. They completed their own deal. Trevor for Oubre and River. Simple, no mystery names. Marshawn stayed in Memphis a bit longer before getting sent to Chicago. Dylan, who the Suns wanted, kept right on starting. And the NBA world got one of its most ridiculous trade stories, built entirely on the chaos of two guys sharing the same last name. Absolute masterpiece of confusion. Fred Roberts and the preseason payoff. In 1986, Fred Roberts was coming off a decent stretch with the Utah Jazz, averaging just over 6 points a game. Boston came knocking with a 2-year deal worth around $315,000, thinking the Jazz wouldn't bother matching it. But Utah surprised everyone and matched the offer, not because they wanted to keep Roberts long-term, but because they saw a trade opportunity. So Boston had to negotiate. Utah asked for a second-round pick. Boston didn't have one. What did they offer instead? A third-rounder in the next year's draft, and something truly out there. 2 preseason games. Not a player, not cash. Just 2 exhibition matchups where Boston stars would roll into Utah and bring the spotlight with them. Utah said yes. That third-round pick turned into Billy Donovan, who never made a splash as a player, but later coached in the league. But the real eyebrow raiser was those 2 preseason games. Utah got to host the Celtics, which meant ticket sales, media attention, and a showcase for fans. That was the actual trade asset. So Fred Roberts was dealt for a draft pick and 2 live basketball games. That's not just quirky, it's basically sports barter economics. The deal is one of the rare moments in NBA history when live games were used like poker chips. And it worked. Utah squeezed value out of their roster without even getting a player back. It's a reminder that sometimes creativity in front offices goes beyond rosters and into revenue. Fred Roberts got a new jersey, Utah got a spotlight, and the league got one of its weirdest trades ever. DeJuan Blair's 0 ACL NBA career. Blair wasn't just playing on bad knees, he was playing with no ACLs at all. Both were torn back in high school, and the surgeries didn't hold. Over time, the scar tissue vanished and his body just adjusted. By the time he got to college, there was no ligament left in either knee. And yet somehow he still hooped like it was nothing. His stability came from pure muscle, strong quads, and hamstring did the work his ligaments were supposed to. This rare setup is something physical therapists call a coper, an athlete who can function without an ACL because their muscle coordination and joint awareness are elite. Blair didn't just walk on the court, he dominated. He was drafted 37th overall by the Spurs in 2009 and went on to play over 400 NBA games. And he made an impact. All rookie second team, major playoff minutes, and a reputation for out-rebounding guys with fully intact knees. But under the surface, doctors were already sounding the alarms. Playing without ACLs puts huge stress on your meniscus and cartilage. That's a fast track to arthritis. His pre-draft scans showed signs of early joint wear, and some teams wouldn't touch him because of it. Still, he made it work. Blair's body adapted in ways that baffle sports medicine. He was a walking case study, proof that the human body can find wild ways to function when it absolutely has to. Even if it meant battling nonstop wear and tear, he kept suiting up. No ACLs, no excuses, just grit, strength, and the kind of durability that belongs in a textbook. Lucia Harris drafted. In the 7th round of the 1977 NBA draft, the New Orleans Jazz used their 137th pick to draft Lucia Harris, a 6'3" center from Delta State. This wasn't a gimmick. Unlike a voided pick back in 1969, this one actually stuck. Harris became the only woman officially drafted by the NBA. She didn't attend training camp though. At the time, she was pregnant and said later she just didn't think she was good enough to play at that level. But the resume said otherwise. At Delta State, she led the team to 3 straight national championships and a 109-6 record. She was named a Kodak All-American 3 times and won the Broderick Cup in 1977. On the international stage, Harris won gold in the 1975 Pan American Games and scored the first ever points in Olympic women's basketball history during the 1976 Games in Montreal, where she helped Team USA earn silver. Years later, the honors kept rolling in. In 1992, she became the first black woman inducted into the Naismith Hall of Fame. She followed that with a Women's Basketball Hall of Fame nod in 1999. Her life and career were spotlighted in the Oscar-winning documentary The Queen of Basketball, produced by Shaquille O'Neal Curry. Harris passed away in January of 2022, but the impact she left never faded. Drafted by an NBA team, decorated with medals, and remembered as a pioneer, her story is one of the most powerful in basketball history. Not symbolic, not token, just extraordinary talent that forced the game to take notice. Josh Primo allegations. In late 2022, things imploded around Josh Primo, a promising young guard drafted 12th overall by the Spurs. What started as whispers turned into a full-blown legal storm when team psychologist Dr. Hillary Cawthon filed a civil lawsuit. She alleged Primo exposed himself during private mental health sessions 9 separate times. The first incident reportedly happened in December 2021, and the Spurs were told about it in January. But they didn't act. The team allegedly sidelined Dr. Cawthon, told her to work remotely, and ultimately didn't renew her contract in August. Primo, meanwhile, was still on the court. It wasn't until October 28th, just weeks after the Spurs picked up his 3rd-year option, that they suddenly waived him. The official statement, it was in the best interest of both parties. A year later, in September 2023, the NBA finally dropped its own ruling. Primo got a 4-game suspension for exposing himself to women. No additional sexual misconduct was found, but the league still called it inappropriate and offensive. As for criminal charges, Bexar County's district attorney declined to prosecute. There just wasn't enough to bring an indecent exposure case to court. That happened in December 2023. Meanwhile, the civil case ended quickly. Dr. Cawthon and the Spurs reached a settlement in November 2022. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, which means it's over for good. Primo's side denied everything. They claimed it was unintentional, a misunderstanding, even calling the allegations fantasy. But no matter the spin, the fallout was real, and it completely altered the trajectory of Primo's early career. Davis, buzzer beater, Game 7, Hornets versus Magic. It was 2002, and everything came down to one final shot. Davis had the ball, baseline, with defenders flying at him and the clock draining. He pulled up, released it at the buzzer, and it splashed through the net. The arena exploded, except it didn't count. The ref waved it off immediately. No review, no delay, just one frantic motion saying no good, and that was it. The game went to overtime, and the Hornets lost. But the shot, on every replay it looked clean. No red lights, no late release. Just a picture-perfect buzzer beater, erased by human error. That miss didn't just sting, it echoed. This wasn't a regular season game in November. It was win or go home. That moment was a catalyst. The league took the heat, heard the backlash, and finally acted. By the next season, the NBA introduced instant replay for buzzer beaters. This play was a major reason why. Fans called it one of the worst calls ever. Heartbreaking was the nice version. Reddit threads lit up with fans reliving that frustration years later. People remember it because it was the perfect shot with the worst outcome. That single decision flipped a playoff result and probably rewrote some careers. Without replay, refs were left guessing in real time, and they guessed wrong. Davis didn't just lose a chance to win, he became the face of a rule change. That missed call showed just how big one moment can be when there's no way to rewind the tape. D'Angelo Russell versus Nick Young. In December of 2015, D'Angelo Russell did something no rookie should ever do. He secretly recorded a teammate. That teammate was Nick Young. On the video, Young talked casually about cheating on his fiancée, Iggy Azalea, and mentioned details about women he'd been with. He didn't know he was being recorded. A few months later, the footage leaked, and that's when everything blew up. Inside the Lakers locker room, Russell went from teammate to pariah. Reports said players stopped sitting with him, walked away from him mid-meal, and shut him out completely. He ate alone. The trust was gone. There was no suspension from the league, but his reputation tanked overnight. The leak wasn't just a PR mess. It exposed a code violation. You don't put private conversations on blast, especially not to the world. Russell apologized, said he felt sick about it, but the damage stuck. The Lakers were already a mess that season. Kobe Bryant's last, and this just made it worse. They got smoked by Utah in a 48-point loss that week, and the drama was everywhere. Media, fans, even players were stunned by how badly things had spiraled. Nick Young kept his distance from the team. The Lakers added security. Russell stayed through that season, but in 2017, they traded him. Magic Johnson later said trust was part of the reason. The recording had left a stain they couldn't scrub. In the end, nobody pressed charges. No one got fined. But reputations changed, careers moved, and the tape became one of the most bizarre and damaging locker room stories in recent NBA memory. Royce White's flying phobia. Royce White came into the NBA with size, skill, and something you don't often see on a scouting report: aviophobia. That's right, a deep, physically overwhelming fear of flying. His anxiety disorder and obsessive traits were well documented before the draft, and yet the Rockets still took him 16th overall in 2012. Right away, there were complications. White asked to travel by bus for certain road games. Houston agreed at first, but tension escalated. He missed training camp. He skipped flights. The front office got frustrated. White claimed he was being dismissed for prioritizing his mental health. Eventually, he got suspended and ended up in the D-League. The weird part, he offered to pay out of pocket for bus travel. He just needed structure, predictability, and mental stability. But the NBA is a travel gauntlet. There's no convenient detour when your schedule bounces between time zones every week. Teams couldn't just reroute. For one guy, the legal debate even hit the ADA. Could his condition be accommodated without derailing team logistics? Lawyers argued, and nothing changed. White tried. He played a few games for the Kings in 2014, then moved overseas. Later, he jumped into politics. But in the end, his name stayed tied to mental health reform in pro sport. He forced the league to look at how it handled anxiety, not with punishment, but with support. His case remains a landmark for what happens when talent runs headfirst into a system not built for neurodivergence. It wasn't a pulled hamstring or broken foot that held him back. It was the silence around mental health finally being forced into the spotlight. Rick Barry frees out. May 16, 1976, Game 7 of the Western Conference Finals. The defending champs, the Golden State Warriors, were locked in with the Phoenix Suns, but something was off. Rick Barry, their star, was barely involved. Not by accident, by design. Barry believed his own teammates froze him out. Passes stopped coming, screens disappeared. They acted like he wasn't there. During halftime, Barry and coach Al Attles reportedly looked at film. Barry saw the cold shoulder and felt it. He came back out, stood on the perimeter, and barely touched the ball again. He wasn't hurt, he was done. This wasn't some low-effort night. It was a playoff game, Game 7. But Barry, known for his sharp tongue and perfectionist grind, had finally worn down the locker room. His teammates were fed up with his criticism and attitude. They weren't going to help him win that one. Barry, seeing the writing on the wall, just stopped competing. He disengaged, barely moved, didn't take shots. The Suns took advantage, closed it out, and the Warriors' title defense collapsed. It wasn't just a loss. It was a breakdown of trust, chemistry, and leadership. Live on the playoff stage. To this day, it's remembered not for a buzzer beater or a stat line, but because a team imploded from the inside. Barry's greatness couldn't overcome the resentment around him. Talent doesn't matter when the team turns away from you. That freeze out wasn't subtle. It was loud, dramatic, and destructive. And it helped end the Warriors season right then and there. Dennis Rodman marries himself. In 1996, Dennis Rodman showed up at a Barnes and Noble in Manhattan wearing a full wedding dress, rolling in by horse-drawn carriage, flanked by tuxedo-clad women. Not for a movie, not for a prank. He was there to promote his new book, Bad As I Wanna Be, and he announced he was bisexual and marrying himself. Yes, himself. This wasn't just a PR stunt. It was classic Rodman. The outfit, the spectacle, the complete disregard for what anyone expected from an NBA player, especially one in a macho sport, was all part of the message. Rodman said he was revealing all sides of himself, from earrings and nail polish to halter tops and tight shorts. This was years of personal style evolution landing at the altar, alone. And it worked. The stunt blasted him into the media spotlight. Cameras rolled. Headlines exploded. The book rocketed to the top of bestseller lists. Rodman wasn't just a rebound machine. He was an unapologetic, unpredictable icon, challenging every rule about how athletes were supposed to behave. But the move also had cultural weight. A black, male athlete embracing femininity, fluid identity, and defiance of gender norms in public. That was rare, It forced a conversation, and nearly 30 years later, people still talk about it. ESPN's The Last Dance even revisited it as a defining moment. Rodman didn't just show up in a dress, he turned a book promo into a statement on self-love, identity, and radical authenticity. That dress? It wasn't just fabric, it was a mirror showing everyone exactly who Dennis Rodman decided to be. Joe Johnson's Big Three Takeover. In 2019, Joe Johnson, at 38 years old, walked into the Big Three like he owned the place. And then he did. He led the league in scoring with 21.9 points per game, racked up 3.9 assists, and even added 7.5 rebounds per game. He wasn't just back, he was dominant. He carried team triplets all the way to a championship, dropping 28 points in the title game against the killer threes. On top of that, he hit game winners, lit up 4-point zones, and showed the kind of control that earned him the ISO Joe nickname in the first place. It wasn't nostalgia, it was straight up production. Johnson's run didn't go unnoticed. He became the first player ever to use a Big Three performance as a launch pad back to the NBA. The Detroit Pistons signed him in September that year. It wasn't a long stint. He was waived in October during final roster cuts, but the move was historic. No one had done that before. ISO Joe had kicked the door open. His Big Three performance wasn't just impressive, it was a statement that even after a quiet exit from the NBA in 2018, his game still had juice. He proved the league wasn't just a retirement hobby. It could be a real platform. For Joe, it was exactly that. He might not have stuck in Detroit, but he changed the conversation. That season made clear, if your game is still sharp, even a street ball style 3-on-3 league can put you back in the spotlight. Joe Johnson didn't just play in the Big Three, he redefined what it could do. Gary Payton's Jacuzzi McDonald's ritual. Before home games, Gary Payton didn't just stretch or hit the court early. He hit the jacuzzi with a full McDonald's spread. Big Mac, fries, 6 nuggets, and all of it went down while he sat marinating in a hot tub. That was his pregame prep. This wasn't a one-time thing. He did it before every home game. It wasn't just about the food, it was the routine. The combo of comfort food and hot water locked him into game mode. The fries? Probably cold by the end. But the ritual? Hot every time. Psychologically, this was Payton's trigger, a signal that it was time to flip the switch. Physically, the jacuzzi loosened him up before even hitting the floor. And somehow it worked. He played 1,335 games over 18 seasons, missed only 25 games in 17 of those, and averaged over 35 minutes a night. That's not luck. That's bizarre consistency with some sauce on the side. The image is wild. One of the league's nastiest defenders, trash-talking legends into submission, warming up his knees while dipping nuggets and plotting steals. But it fit him. Everything about Payton's career was intense, calculated, and personal, even if it looked ridiculous. It wasn't about the nutrition, it was about the mindset. He believed in it, so it worked. And in an era where players chug protein shakes and meditate pregame, Payton was soaking in a tub, eating fast food like a man prepping for war in a spa. And then he'd go out and lock someone up. That's Gary Payton for you. Relentless, ritualistic, and absolutely unbothered. Knicks hire a spy. In the late 1960s, the Knicks brought on Edmund Mike Burke as team president. That wouldn't raise eyebrows, except Burke had previously worked for the OSS and the CIA. He wasn't just a guy with a few old medals, he had been a decorated wartime operative with a Navy Cross and a Silver Star. That's not your average resume for running a basketball team. Burke didn't roll into Madison Square Garden wearing night vision goggles, but he absolutely brought that Intel world mindset to sports management. Precision, surveillance, control, and yeah, that bred rumors. He was known to keep everything tight, from staff moves to internal leaks. He was the president of the Knicks and Madison Square Garden, and the guy ran the Yankees too for a stretch, just in case you thought he wasn't busy enough. Was he bugging the locker room? No evidence says he was literally spying, but his presence, with that cloak and dagger past, led to whispers that he was monitoring everything. Not with wiretaps, more with icy stares, and a deep suspicion of chaos. He ran the front office like a mission, and that made people uneasy. So yeah, the Knicks hired a former CIA guy, not to tell players or decode playbooks, but to bring discipline to an organization that, like the Cold War, was built on power dynamics and people who didn't always play nice. Burke might not have planted listening devices, but when he was in charge, nobody felt like they were totally off the radar. Olden Pollen impersonates a cop. In the year 2000, former NBA center Olden Pollen somehow decided his honorary LAPD badge wasn't just a souvenir, it was a license to intimidate strangers in traffic. On September 13th, in Salt Lake City, he got cut off while driving, so naturally, he followed the guy home, whipped out the badge, and told him he was an officer. No, seriously? Then in October, he did it again, this time in West Valley City. Another traffic beef, another badge, flash. But this time, he claimed he was with the California Sheriff's Office. Just made up the affiliation mid-intersection. At that point, it wasn't even confusing. It was a pattern. The courts took notice. He got slapped with 2 misdemeanors for impersonating an officer and 1 for disorderly conduct. Pollenus pled guilty, paid $450 in fines, and was sentenced to probation and anger management. Not a great box score. These weren't one-off oops moments. Both incidents involved him actively trying to use that honorary badge, meant to be symbolic, as leverage to scare people in road rage situations. And 2 times in 1 month? That's not bad luck. That's poor judgment on repeat. He didn't try to spin it as a joke. There was no PR cleanup, just a 7-foot-tall ex-player playing pretend cop in Utah traffic. It's one of those strange, almost cinematic moments in sports history where a retired pro athlete ends up doing something so bizarre it becomes a legal headline. In the end, Pollenus learned the hard way that honorary badges don't come with actual authority, and that yelling at prosecutors only adds to the fine. Mucci Norris and the insomnia injury. In March of 1999, Mucci Norris made NBA history, not with a dunk, not with a buzzer beater, but by being sidelined due to insomnia. Norris had been struggling with chronic insomnia since around 1990, shortly after his mother passed away. For nearly a decade, he'd been operating on fumes, sometimes just 1 or 2 hours of sleep a night. And finally, it caught up. His shot went missing, his finishing crumbled, and his free throw numbers tanked. He was shooting just 32.5% from the field and barely 37% at the line. Not exactly backup material behind Gary Payton. Coach Paul Westphal acknowledged it straight up. Norris needed rest, not practice. And when a guy with a 10-inch afro shows up looking half zombie before tip-off, there's really no hiding it. Seattle deactivated him on March 4th, making it one of the most unusual injury listings in league history. Norris later returned and went on to carve out a solid career in Houston, New York, and New Orleans. He finished with over 2,000 points and more than 1,000 assists. But that moment stood out. A player being taken out not by a knee or an ankle, but by a brain that wouldn't shut off. It highlighted something rarely discussed back then: mental and neurological health as legitimate barriers to performance. Mucci Norris was more than a cult figure with a flashy look. He was a guy battling an invisible opponent every night and still finding a way to compete. If you enjoyed this, I'm going to be posting a lot here. I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe. Thanks for watching.